Thank you for coming back onto the podcast. Yeah, so I guess very first question, Sean, is your HR journey. How to start? Where'd you start? Was it by accident?
Yep, very much by accident. So yeah, going back a while now, I started off in recruitment and totally fell into it. I was in a career that I wasn't happy with and I was kind of at a loose end for what to do. I went to a recruiting agency and I said, hey, like these are my skills, these are my qualifications, what can I do with them? Do I have to go and study something again, or is there some sort of job out there where I can take my transferable skills and someone will hire me? And they turned around and said, well, we've got a job here. And voila. So that was my first taste. That was in a recruiting agency here in New Zealand, going back a while now, but very much my first flavour. There were things I liked about that job and things that I didn't like about that job. I didn't like the recruiting agency culture where it felt a little bit like revenue was more important than placing the candidate in the right place.
Yep.
And so I loved the kind of engagement with people and helping them find their right role, and likewise helping businesses find the right people. But I kind of figured out pretty early on that agency life wasn't for me. But not long after that, I decided to move to the Netherlands. So that was a massive move that was really just random, to be honest. I wanted a different experience and a different culture. We had recently gotten married and it felt like a good time. And that's when I first discovered tech. So the first role that I got in the Netherlands was with Booking.com during a time where Airbnb was kind of just taking off and Booking.com was like, oh, what are we going to do about this? So I grew the department that looked after their private homes. We started off as 8 people and I just took on a contract there. In 8 months we grew that team out to a sub-department of 120 people. It was pretty quick moving. And at that point in time I got a little shoulder chat from a startup, and that was my entry into the startup world. And that was very much where I found like, okay, here's my place, here's my people, like the fast pace, the kind of wear any hat you need to get like something done. Just the nature of like high growth and excitement and high risk was very rewarding. Unfortunately, that startup didn't quite, go down the startup route the dream route where you IPO or you sell out. So they ended up closing the Amsterdam office. They were a Silicon Valley based startup. They ended up closing the Amsterdam office because they couldn't quite get the product off the ground in Europe. But when a door closes, a new one opens, and that took me to Uber. So Uber in the Netherlands at that point in time was the headquarters for Europe, Middle East and Africa. We had, I guess, just under 200 people in the office, and in the 4 years that I was at Uber, by the time I ended, I think we had a few thousand people across 3 different campuses in Amsterdam. So very exciting period of growth, and Uber was a huge pivotal piece of my experience because I lived through the super pumped experience for anyone who's read the book or watched the show, and I got to see kind of like black and white, day and night, the flow-on effects from different types of leadership. So leadership under Travis Kalanick, who was the co-founder, who ultimately got ousted by the board, and the culture that was built under his leadership and the culture that was built under Dara's leadership, and the business impact that had as well. So it was a very interesting time, but it really shaped the way that I think about building cultures, building teams, building, performing businesses really. And from there, I decided, at some point in time, I decided that it was time to come back to New Zealand. And after a short kind of little contract that I had with Tesla to kind of tide me over, I ended up at a Kiwi startup called Halter. We're about 60 people at that point in time. We were 120 in the first 6 months that I was there.
What year was this?
At Halter.
Yep.
And then I started there as a talent manager and moved into the head of people role, and decided to wrap up there. I guess it was just about a year and a half ago now, and start my own thing, which is BeHeard, which came about from a place of I guess frustration, you could say, at the Kiwi tech sector. I loved coming back to New Zealand after 7 years abroad and seeing the progress that had been made in the Kiwi tech sector. I was really excited by the startup scene and all the kind of opportunity and exciting things that were happening. But at the same time, I felt like there was maybe not a lack of responsibility, but how would I put this? Like a lack of the understanding of the responsibility that we have in the tech sector to be building products that serve society equitably. So diversity, equity, inclusion was, and I guess still is in a lot of ways, a bit of a buzzword. Like how do we build diverse teams and inclusive cultures? But I think there was, what I was seeing, it was very kind of like face value conversations, and the deeper why of making sure that we have a diverse group of people at the table when we're building products that will shape the way that we do things in the future and shape the way, we're disrupting, right? In the tech sector, we're disrupting. And so we can be tech for good, or we can make things worse. And in my opinion, the only way that you're going to have a product that truly serves society equitably is if you have a diverse group of perspectives who are creating and building that. And that's what I felt was kind of missing when I was talking to people in different businesses across the Kiwi tech sector. And so BeHeard was a journey that I didn't really know what it was going to look like, but I wanted to do something in the New Zealand tech industry to help move the dial in terms of like not just kind of surface level conversations about, how do we increase diversity in our talent pool, or because that's a lot of what I was hearing, but really kind of the why we do this, and more about the equity and inclusion as well, because I think as part of the annoying thing about acronyms is you can sometimes lose the meaning behind the individual words, right? And I think quite often we hear DEI or DNI or EDI, whatever, and people think, oh, diversity, but what about equity? What about inclusion? And I see so many businesses put a lot of effort into thinking about how they're going to diversify their talent pools and their makeup of their employees, but very little thought behind how they're actually going to build equitable systems and processes and operating procedures that truly create equal opportunity within the company, and how they build inclusive environments so that when those people from underrepresented groups get into their business, they want to be there and they want to stay and they can bring their full selves to work, because it's one thing to attract the talent to your company, it's another thing to have them engaged and retain them. So sorry, that was a very long-winded answer about my journey, but that's kind of the journey that I've been on and how I kind of got here. And more recently, I joined Auror. So Auror was a business that I got to know through my work with BeHeard. And to be honest, they're a Kiwi business that I admired for a long time because of the way that they were approaching diversity, equity, inclusion. It was very intentional, and they were very transparent about it. So coming on board and working with them through BeHeard was very much, it was great because I got to see that it wasn't just talk, they very much walk the talk, and having the opportunity to come on board as their director of talent was something that I was super excited about, because we're very much aligned values wise, and I think I can have a huge impact there as well. So yeah.
What does DEI in practice look like at Auror?
That's a good question. I'd say at Auror we have created kind of an approach or a framework where we're listening, we're learning and unlearning, and then we're actioning. So the listening is how we understand from our people how we're doing, and that's really key to make sure that we are not making assumptions, and we're really understanding beyond kind of the numbers and the data, how people think and feel about working at Auror. And the learning and the unlearning, they kind of come hand in hand. I think one thing when we're talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, there's a bit of a journey that everybody goes on. I've been on that journey myself. Like, I think a huge part of what has shaped my journey was my experience moving overseas and being part of a culture where I wasn't part of the dominant cultural group for the first time in my life, and a lot of things that I just kind of believed as truth were those things were challenged because I was surrounded by people who had different life experiences to me. So I think something that we've always acknowledged is that everybody's on a journey. Everybody will be learning as they go, and we just need to kind of embrace curiosity to understand different perspectives. And there's a lot that you'll have to unlearn as well, and that was something, again, that I kind of took from my journey. I very much kind of grew up in a very kind of like vanilla sort of environment. I didn't have a lot of diverse people around me growing up, and I very much took like my parents' values and beliefs and just adopted them. And if I'm honest, I had to unlearn some of those beliefs along the way. It's kind of like that thing, like the more you know, the less you know. Like, the more you learn, the less you realize you know. So unlearning is a huge part of it too, and then we just make sure that we're actioning from there. I always like to take an approach of knowing your baseline, knowing where you're at, and then focusing in on where you have opportunities for improvement. I think another thing that I see a lot of in DEI, and all of this comes with good intent, is these kind of long laundry lists of initiatives that people have thought up because it seems like a good thing to do, and maybe it is, but maybe it isn't. But ultimately, there's so much that you can do when it comes to diversity, equity, inclusion, like to the point where a lot of people I talk to almost feel like in this state of inertia, because it's like, where do I even start? And they're kind of sort of paralyzed, but if you can just understand your baseline and you can kind of pick a couple of focus areas and hone on those, like you will be able to see outcomes as a result. So I think that's just another thing that's really kind of important about the way that we approach things. We're very intentional about looking at, hey, where are we? Where do we want to be? And then once we've got that baseline and the North Star, we figure out what comes in between.
So diversity to me, and I want you to school me, is gender, cultural differences, and maybe even religious differences as well.
Yeah.
What am I missing?
Everything else.
Yes. What else?
I mean, there's so much to it, right? And again, I think, you could cut this so many ways, but there's age, there's, disability status, there's socioeconomic factors, there's just diversity of thought and experience. Like, something that was really interesting that I saw at a previous company working with a team who were very, what should I say? They had a strong bias towards certain schools. There's so much that makes up who you are, and there's almost like no limit to what makes somebody diverse, right?
Yeah.
It could be many, many things.
One thing, it's just a question I have. So people with disabilities, let's just say, for example, some people who are deaf might be very strong coders,
Mm-hmm.
but it's difficult for them to communicate with a team because maybe the entire team, not maybe, let's just say in this scenario, the entire team, they can speak, they can hear as well.
Mm.
How would you go about having a conversation with the company? And also, what sort of formula would you have of trying to bring that person into the workforce?
Like, something that I've always something that we try and do at Auror is kind of be mindful of the way that we work beyond just like being in the office. So having different tooling, having different ways people can communicate, you know, having flexibility in, you know, where you work and how you work. And I think, honestly, it's just that. It's not assuming that you know what that person needs, but rather, you know, letting them tell you, like, how do you want to be supported? Like, what tools do you need? What is it that we can do to make this successful for you? And then a lot of the time, like, it might not even be a heavy lift. I think this is the other thing. People kind of get into this mindset that, like, oh, we can't go there, that's going to be such a thing, but it might not be. And we can't make those assumptions. Like, we always need to test our assumptions to, you know, get past that, like, what we think versus what is actual fact. I don't know if I have a formula, but it would probably just be a little bit more like, hey, what would you need for this to be successful? And then I think, you know, if that person is amazing at their job, then, you know, I guess this is probably going to differ from business to business, but I really like to believe that people would do the right thing to help that person get on board, set them up for success.
No, I totally agree. One question. What's your thoughts on street smart versus academically smart?
Oh my gosh. Okay, so I feel strongly about this. I am not university educated, and so perhaps I'm a bit biased, but in all of the businesses that I've been in, I can say, like, there's obviously value to education, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that there isn't value to education, but I can also say that there have been people I've worked with who don't have formal education qualifications, and they are bringing just as much, if not more in some situations, to the table. So I just don't think, like, what you've studied or where you've studied is necessarily an indicator for whether or not you're going to be able to perform, with exceptions, of course, right? You know, there's obviously some roles, like, if you're a lawyer, you need to be a lawyer and you need to have your degree and pass the bar, whatever. If you're a doctor, you don't want somebody operating on you if they haven't done their training. So, you know, take that with a grain of salt. But the businesses that I have worked in the past, there isn't necessarily a strong correlation between success and the impact the individual can have based on the schooling that they've had. So again, like, it's something that I just try to keep a real open mind about. I know there's this huge halo effect that happens when somebody's been to a certain school and you're looking at a CV, you're like, must be smart.
Yeah.
But, you know, probably are smart, not necessarily the right person for your team or your business, and you can't let that detract from like what you're looking for. Again, like, you can bring in a bunch of smart people, but do you want a team of smart individuals, or do you want a team of high performers, or do you want a high performing team? Like, those are two different things. So I personally don't get caught up in schooling.
Yeah, that makes sense. Equity. What does that actually mean?
Good question. I feel like equity is like the E in DEI just doesn't get the same airtime as probably the other two. So equity is your systems, your operating procedures, your processes, and the way that you build your functions to serve people equitably. I was just about to say something. What was I about to say? I had a conversation with somebody recently who was asking about my work with BeHeard, and they were like, what do you do? And I'm like, it's kind of like, what do I not do? Like, I feel like equity is so like, it touches everything. It's not just like this thing that you can do in isolation, like, oh, and this, you know, I'm probably gonna like maybe offend some people. No.
Go for it.
You know, sometimes you see that there is like a function within a business, which is like diversity, equity, inclusion. But I wonder how much that achieves in the equity piece, right? When it's not baked into the business. Like equity, you're talking about your how you think about compensation, how you think about progression, how you think about giving feedback. There's so much, and it's really something that you need to ingrain in pretty much every single process that you have that touches the people in your business. So yeah, I think it's something that you can't really do off in this silo and this little vacuum. Like I think it's just something that your leadership need to be on board with, and obviously your people function need to be on board with, because yeah, it touches everything.
If we were to break it up, I guess maybe I'm not asking the right question, but let's just say that if we wanted to ensure that we're equitable during our hiring process in particular, what are signs we are and what are signs we're not?
Yeah, okay, cool. So like an equitable recruiting process, you're putting everybody through the same process.
Yep.
First of all, you have the same steps in the same process for everybody. You have the same questions that you're asking everybody. You're not chopping and changing for different people, so that you can actually get you can properly benchmark candidates against one another because you've asked them all the same thing. It's about making sure that there's equal like opportunity for people to come into the funnel as well. Speaking like recruiter lingo here, but like entering into your recruiting process, like, you know, there's something that I see a lot of, and it's never with ill intent. And this is a thing, right? Like I feel like I preface a lot of things with that, but a lot of the time, you know, people aren't intrinsically bad. Most people, right? They want to do the right thing. These are just things that we do without thinking that have negative consequences. So you have to be so intentional when you are thinking about diversity, equity, inclusion. You have to kind of stop and think and pause and think about what you're doing. But the example I was going to give there was like, I've seen situations where there is a new position that's been discussed at like a leadership level, like, oh, we need somebody over in a new market, we need somebody over in Chile. And somebody pipes up, oh, I know the perfect person, Sandra would be great at that. Next thing you know, Sandra's on a plane and like her whole team's going, oh, wait a second, like never heard about that role, never had the opportunity to put their hand up. Little do you know, Tom is fluent in Spanish, had spent 2 semesters there. Like maybe there was a better person for the job, but you didn't even stop because you just acted without thinking. So it's also like giving people equal opportunity to put their hand up, and then that, you know, the equity throughout the process, making sure the process is fair. It's the same, it's objective as well. Objective interviewing, like, again, this kind of blows my mind, but I guess I am, you know, I've been in the game for a while now, so maybe it's just because I'm so in it, but it blows my mind how few people have ever actually been trained to interview.
Yep.
This was a question I asked people when I was starting BeHeard, and I talked to a bunch of leaders in tech, did some like discovery work because I was just keen to understand like what's the landscape here, like where are people at? And one of the questions I asked was like, how did you learn to hire? Like nobody had an answer to that. Perhaps like 2 people who had like a people background had like an answer, but everybody was some form of, oh, well, I was kind of flung into a leadership position for the first time. I had to hire, so I just did it, and I kind of watched what everybody else was doing, so I just did what they were doing. Yep. Maybe somebody says, oh, like, you know, I read an HBR article or something. Like, but that is really the extent that people are like trained in interviewing. So again, it's like, it's not necessarily that people were coming at things with ill intent, but when you're not trained to objectively assess somebody's ability, it's very hard to do, right? It could take years and years for you to perfect that because you have no sort of guardrails as to like what does good look like, what does best practice look like. So that's something that I always kind of like hone in on as well. Like, do we actually know how to objectively assess somebody? What does that look like? Something that I see happening a bit of, like, that makes me feel a little bit uncomfortable is when people say, okay, our team is lacking X, Y, Z, so we're only going to look for this. And that can have really negative flow-on effects. It can be really like tokenistic. It can come across very tokenistic. It can cause a lot of resentment in the team with the people who identify with the group that you said that you're no longer going to look for. And there is huge chance that when that person comes on board, eventually it's going to get to them that, oh, you were our woman hire. And then they're going to be questioning whether they're there because of their gender or whether they're there because of their skills. So the way that I like to approach things is to focus on the balance pipeline at the very beginning of the process. So making sure you have a very balanced top of funnel. And then from there, making sure that you have that very kind of fair, equitable, and objective assessment process. And if you have if you have balance, whatever balance may mean for XYZ role, right? If you have that balance at the top of the funnel, and if you have that equitable process throughout, then you should start seeing those numbers of diverse candidates trickling through your funnel. And you want to be able to say at the end of the day that you hired the best person for the job. At the point in time that you can't say that, I would be questioning whether you're doing something for the wrong reasons, like whether you are being tokenistic. I think, like, personally, I don't like the idea of changing your scoring system for diversity. Because again, it's like that objective assessment, right? Like, if you're keeping the assessment the same for everybody, then you can say that you've hands down got the right person for the job. That said, also the other thing on that is, again, kind of bringing it back to this, like, what can breed resentment and what kind of shoots you in the foot when you're doing diversity, equity, inclusion work, is when you make moves like that and people then start thinking, and this is something I've heard time and time in my career, like, we don't want to lower the bar, which is kind of offensive to me, because it's like, why do you think that, a diverse candidate is going to be less than? There's so many amazing, people out there who come from different walks of life, who have just as much skill, just as much ability, and like, the fact that people think you need to quote unquote lower the bar to get in different perspectives, like, no, like, you just need to look harder. They exist, they're out there. And again, like, if you are quote unquote lowering the bar, then you're lazy, that was a bit rough, but you're taking an approach that is just kind of a bit lazy, in my opinion. Like, go out there and find the right person, because they'll be out there, and you want to be able to say that you hired the best person for the job. That said, like, I feel like there's like a caveat here, where there could be a scenario where you do need to look for, like, transferable skills if you can't find the folks that you're looking for in an industry. I'll give an example here. So I'll give a hypothetical example. So let's say you are hiring let's say you're hiring for a car salesperson, and all of your car salespeople on the shop floor are men, and there's not a lot of auto salespeople out there who are women. So
true.
yeah, but there are so many women salespeople out there whose transferable skills can come really nicely into that role. So I think there are cases where you have to be more open-minded in terms of bringing people on board with transferable skills. And what I'll just say there is, if you're being open-minded for one group of people, you are open-minded for everybody.
Right.
It doesn't just apply to that diverse group, because again, that's when you start getting this, like, again, this is like all my opinion, right? Like, I'm sure there'll be people with like who take a different approach, and like, I'm always open for like different perspectives as well. So maybe we'll be having this conversation in a year time, and I'll have a different. You know, we're all on a journey, we're all learning, but I think from my experience of what has served me well in my profession, and where I've seen mistakes made that can hurt the culture or the business, like, those are kind of my takeaways.
No, fair call. How do you think locally, so we can talk about locally in particular, what can we do to actually fix our top of the funnel issues that we have in the tech industry?
Yeah, it's a tough one. It does start there for sure. Because you see, like, I was looking at this the other day, so don't quote me on this because I don't have it in front of me, but looking at the gender makeup of the engineers going through, I'm pretty sure it was Auckland University that I was looking at, that is really balanced. Like, people going through those degrees is quite balanced. And then you watch it drop off at different career stages till you get to the point, like, at the moment, like, you know, we're looking for staff and principal engineers, and it's really hard to find gender balance in that really senior group of engineers. So you've got to think, right, like, what's going on here where we have, you know, obviously it was probably a different story when people who are at that level of seniority were going through, but you still see that trend happening of people dropping off, and you're like, what's going on here? That's actually causing that. Because if we're getting, I mean, we can talk about different types of representation, right? But for this case, like gender, like if we're getting that gender balance at that early stage, I think it's less about like getting people into the educational system, but how do we keep them there? And I think that's where like equity and inclusion is really an interesting conversation. I've kind of got like 2 points I can go down here, but like I think there are a lot of areas where we need to do a better job of getting different groups into like tech roles. Like there is a huge lack of multi-Pacifica going into those careers. So there are definitely areas where we just need to get more people into, you know, interested and excited. But I think we also just need to build more inclusive cultures that are welcoming for people from underrepresented groups, so we don't see that drop off.
What does it look like?
You can be you, right? Like that's ultimately what people want when they go to work. The amount of effort it takes to put on a mask every day. And I've been in those roles, right? Like I'm myself not technical, but I've been in positions where I'm the only woman in the room of 12 men, and you do feel like you have to play a slightly different game or like say something different. Like you feel you're not 100% authentically you. I will say that I am not in those scenarios, or have not been in those scenarios. And that's uncomfortable, and I've left roles because of that. Like I can't get past like needing to be something other than authentically myself to feel like I belong. It's exhausting, and I think that's ultimately just what people want. They want to be able to come to a place and not put on a mask, and that's when you get the most out of your people as well. Because when, like, again, like talking about the all the goodness of diversity and why we have you know, such a focus on, well, why there's so much evidence around diverse teams outperforming homogenous teams. is because those different perspectives that people bring. However, if you don't have a psychologically safe place where people can bring their perspective and speak up and have a different opinion, and then like it's all in vain.
Yep,
You've got all these diverse people trying to like conform to this culture that they're not bringing their full selves and all the goodness that they could bring. So again, it's kind of just like we need to do a better job of building an industry that is more inclusive for folks who are coming from different backgrounds, I think.
No, definitely. I totally agree with that. No, thank you once again.